Okay, my name is Adetola Akanbiemu from the National Open University of Nigeria. Okay, so imagine that a student writes an assignment using an AI tool. The student submits the assignment to you. Very, very convincing paragraph. Well, maybe 2, 3, 4 academic references. And then you check and you discover that those references, they never existed. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This is what happens now, every time, always. And so my research is to look at how we can redefine information literacy into AI literacy to help our learners understand that it is not just to find information, but to know when to trust it and when not to trust it. So why are we talking about this? Currently, every learner uses AI, whether we like it or not. They will always find a way to use it. And because they use it, we must know when to tell them how to use it. We must be able to question how they use it, especially because they are all distance learners, and distance learners rely heavily on digital tools. So if you have learners that rely on digital tools, it's very easy for them to use these tools. Therefore, we need to make sure that the frameworks for our information literacy, is it adequate in this AI era? If it is not adequate, then we need to look for sustainable ways in which our learners can acquire skills that will help them use AI responsibly. Now, like I said, our challenge is right now we have outputs that contains bias outputs that look like noise. They're not the real thing, but they look like it. And currently there's so much of a reliance on AI tools, and even the kind of updates we have on our curriculums cannot help with the AI revolution, because there's going to be changes in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and this could lead to confusion, disengagement, and reduced retention. So this study aims to identify the essential AI information literacy competences, and then examine their influence on engagement, academic engagement, self-directed learning, and retention. And then this study also looked at how we can discover or develop a sustainable framework for it. Now, the context for this study is the National Open University of Nigeria, where I come from. And it's the largest ODL institution in West Africa. We have such a diverse, geographically distributed learners across the nation. And we have over 120,000 active students. And the core course for this study is GST 104, which is the use of library. It is a foundational course for every undergraduate learners that enters the university. Now, in that course, we teach them how to search the database. We teach them how to use information, how to identify correct information, how to evaluate information, and how to use it ethically. So for this study, I used the GST 104 learners. Now, this study is a mixed method. I used for the first one, I used for the qualitative exploration. I had 60 ODL learners for my class, GST 104, and we had a focus group where we discussed, and when we did that, we were able to identify some AI information literacy competencies. And in the phase 2, I did a simple random sampling, sampled 250 students. And I'd like to say that for every class in the past 3 years, I've had between 9,000 to 10,000 students that register for this class every semester. So this is what we found out. Now, when I came up with the thematic analysis, I came out with 5 AI information literacy competences. And the first is data discernment. Now, data discernment ensures that our learners, they generate references that are credible. They verify every output that AI gives them. They do not just swallow it hook, line, and sinker. And when they also verify, they verify with institutional databases and library repositories. And the second is the prompt literacy, the ability to create more structured and intentional prompts that specifies tones, that specifies sources and academic expectation. And the third one is evaluative skepticism. Now, this makes you aware that, yes, even if AI responses can sound authoritative, can still contain bias or inaccurate information. So as a learner, you evaluate it, you check, could this be? And that also brings me to think that as a learner, you must first have your own thoughts. You must know what you must have something in mind. A learner that has nothing in mind would totally depend on AI, would not even know when there are hallucinations or when there are biases or when there are noises. And so the fourth competency is ethical reasoning, the responsible use of AI. How transparent are you using AI? Have you checked that there is no bias? Have you checked that you're using it the right way? And then finally, reflective metacognition. That's the awareness of AI dependence. That is the ability to think beyond the technical skill of AI, the ability to think critically, by reflecting what you know, by reflecting learning practices. So these are the 5 skills that this study came up with. So I proceed. Now, in testing the influence of these competencies on academic engagement, on self-directed learning, and on privileged persistent. Now, in this study, I discovered that reflective metacognition was the strongest predictor of all of these competencies. And that brings me to think that for a learner to be really independent and not to totally rely on AI tools, then the place for critical thinking is the most important. The place for a learner to look at the output that AI brings and check if it is what it should be or if it is the expectations. Okay, so for us as lecturers, we already have some of these things in mind. We already know what we want. So it might be quite easier for us when you put in your prompts and AI generates outputs. It might be quite easier for you to know, no, this is not what I'm talking about. But for learners who are not sure or who just want to get the assignments done, they just pick it, copy, paste, and submit. So, but reflective metacognition is what will predict it's a very strong indicator of self-directed learning. And ethical reasoning too was also a significant predictor. Now, because it's a mixed method, I triangulated the quantitative evidences and the qualitative evidences. And throughout, the reliability for all the indicators for the quantitative evidences were quite high. And it's still indicates that the competencies are layered. It starts from the foundational skills, which is the information literacy skills, to the technical, to the practical. It takes us to ethical and then the metacognitive. And in terms of integrating the findings, I discovered that reflective metacognition and evaluative skepticism are the strongest drivers of sustained engagement and persistence in AI-supported learning environment. And so I'm proposing this framework. I call it the hybrid information literacy framework. So if we look at it, this framework is like a flow. On the foundation, on the foundational role, we have the literacies. We have the traditional information literacy. That's the ability to find and use information the right way. We have the AI literacy, understanding the mechanism and logic of the AI systems. We have the data literacy, the ability to generate data and use data properly, ethical reasoning. That's the moral compass for information use, and the reflective metacognition. Now, this all flows because they are the foundation. They all flow to the AI, RL competences. The basis for all of this is the data discernment, the ability for learners to identify quality data, filter noise, filter AI hallucinations, prompt literacy, evaluative skepticism, the ethical reasoning, the reflective metacognition, and they all lead to these retention indicators that will determine if a learner will stay, will enjoy learning, will engage academically, will be able to study independently. And at the core of these is the reflexivity, adaptability, and transparency. That's like the atmosphere in which all of these indicators will work. So like I said, it's a proposed framework. Now, how has now applied this framework? So I'm going to use my class as an example. Now, when I get to the point of, there's a certain module that talks about literature review, how to review literature. You know, when we want to review literature, you need to talk about how to identify the right literature, how to identify the relevant sources, the credible sources, and then I introduce them to databases. Okay, so what we do is, we do an example. I show them, we go to ChatGPT, we go to maybe Gemini, and then we say, we want to do some stuff and tell it to generate references. And then afterwards, I'm going to create them into rooms on Zoom class. Then I'll ask them to verify the references, and then they'll come back to report. And over time, I've heard them say the references were not credible. Some will say they never existed. And so when at the end of the class, I give them like an assignment and say, okay, if these references did not exist, based on the same topic, in the next class, I would like you to give me maybe a paragraph with correct references. And they come back, and because they understand how to search databases, how to go through literature, they now understand that indeed there's lots of noise on the AI. And so it has helped them to verify every output. It has helped them to learn about reading journals and articles, and they now understand the ethical guidelines on how they should use AI. Now, for ODL institutions, we cannot say that our learners will not use AI. We might think that all we are trying to do, they might, but they will still. But what we can do is to prioritize the literacy, the ethical use of AI, which is AI literacy. I remembered I was part of a research team, and we investigated the use of generative AI among learners in National Open University. And one of the deliverables for the research was to conduct a workshop for our learners on the ethical use of AI. I think last year, March, we have all our faculties, 8 of our faculties, and for every Saturday, we had a 2 to 3 hour workshop on the ethical use of AI, and we started by asking them to identify AI-generated images, AI-generated information, how to verify. At the beginning, a lot of them didn't understand it, but at the end of the workshop, we also did an evaluation, and we got a feedback, and we discovered that after the training, lots of learners now had better understanding on how to use AI. And then it's very important that we redesign our foundational courses, because that is when they get into the university. That is the first thing they learn. That's how they get the hold of how they should use AI. And then it's very important that librarians of faculty are trained in the use of AI. So as I conclude, I like to say that currently AI changes how learners now interact with knowledge. Whichever way our students will succeed, it's very important that critical thinking is part of what they know, ethical reasoning, the ability to remove bias, and they must use AI effectively. The framework offers a sustainable path, not just for NOUN, but for any AI-enabled education. And I close with this, that AI will not replace learning, but it will reshape how learning happens. But the real question for higher education is whether students or learners are prepared to think critically with AI.